money is unemotional, and you have to be unemotional about your trading decisions and your P&L. You have to have emotional detachment. If you have emotional detachment to your P&L, then you can actually have consistency.
Do you have problems in your life that you're not addressing that you could solve? And the answer is yes. And it's an easy thing to figure out. You sit on your bed one morning and say, okay, there's some things that need to be done that I don't want to do, that I could do, that would make things better by the end of the day. What are they? Well, your conscience will deliver those in no time flat, man. And then you might have to say, okay, well, how do I entice myself into doing a few of those? And if you ask, instead of trying to force yourself to do it like you're a tyrant and a slave at the same time, you can usually negotiate with yourself so that you'll start to sort those things out. Sort them out. Put your house in order. And then move out. Move on. So it's important because the thing is, you have a practice domain, right? There are things that are within your grasp that you could fix. Fix them. And you'll learn. You'll learn, because it's harder than it looks. Fix them and you'll learn how to fix things, and then something else will beckon as another problem that you could fix. You know, you all have your problems. What does that mean? Like, there's an infinite number of problems in the world. Some of them happen to be yours. Why is that? I don't know exactly. But you have your problems. Great. Solve them. You know, one of the things I learned as a therapist, every therapist has to learn this, is because one of the things you wonder when you're first starting to be a clinician is, how do you not take the catastrophes of your clients home with you? And the answer to that is because it's immoral to. They're not your problems. They're their problems. Like, they're their life. You know, your problems are your life. You don't want to solve someone else's problems for them, because you take away the deep meaning that's to be found in having them work through the problems on their own. And then you steal the credit. Well, I can help you with that. It's like, well, yeah, maybe, but I don't help you with the next problem then. So in any case, you sort out the problems that are right in front of you, and it will make you grow very, very rapidly. And then you'll be able to sort out more complex problems without making them worse. But the solution to a very complex problem is you should be a better person than you are, because then you'd be better at solving complex problems. And lots of them are coming your way. So bloody well get your act together. And that's what I've been telling people. But more than that, because it's more than that, because that's merely burdening people with excess responsibility, let's say, so that can be a crushing message. You're not who you could be. You know, get your bloody act together. You're whining away in the corner, and you're no good to yourself and anyone else. You know, it's harsh. But then there's another element to that, which is there's way more to you than you think you are, and that you have something necessary and vital to contribute to the world. And if you don't contribute it, that things will happen that aren't good, and that's terrible for you and everyone else. So it's not only that you need to do this because it's your responsibility, but you need to understand that there isn't anything better that you could do for yourself or for anyone else. And people are dying to hear that message.
Yeah, that resonates with young men.
Yeah, well, it's so amazing. Like, I'm in this very weird situation right now, to say the least. Well, if you try and you fail, that could be in a micro endeavor or a macro endeavor. If you try and you fail, well, you have two options. Well, you have three. One is you can just ignore it. And sometimes that's the right thing to do, because if you tried again, it would work. And so that's the utility of persistence. But you never know, in some fundamental sense, whether you're being persistent or blind. That's a tough thing to figure out. Most entrepreneurs who become successful have failed in a dozen enterprises before. And so are they persistent, or have they failed to learn from experience? It's like, well, there's a toss-up. Then imagine you don't ignore it. Okay, now you're gonna fix the problem. Well, then you have two choices. You could fix the world, or you could fix yourself. And let's say, well, fixing yourself is often, at least in principle, easier than fixing the world, although sometimes the world is wrong and you're right. Not very often, but sometimes, you know. So if you're going to fix yourself, you've failed multiple times. The first thing that has to happen is that the part of you that's error-ridden has to die. And so there is that element. That's exactly, I would say, in some sense, the payoff of neuroticism is, well, why have negative emotion? It's, well, you get anxious so that you stop doing things that might cause your own destruction. Like there's value in the signal, but because it's so difficult to determine, like if you're arguing with your wife, this is a constant issue in marriages, it's like, well, should she change or you? And the answer sometimes is she should, and sometimes the answer is you should, and sometimes the answer is you both should, but it's not like that's easy to figure out a priori. One of the things I tried to do with my clients all the time was to, I wouldn't say minimize a problem, but it would be to parameterize it. You know, like maybe I'd have a client who was so afraid of their economic uncertainty that they wouldn't even tell me how much rent they were paying, because I had clients like that. And so I would continue to inquire till I got them to admit the terrible truth about their rent, and then we could narrow the problem. We could keep narrowing the scope of the problem so they didn't feel like the problem meant their entire financial future was going to fall apart. And it's that, and there's a canalization in that, right? That narrowing where that's actually beneficial. Imagine that you have a problem, and then imagine that you want a solution, and imagine that there's a particular solution to that particular problem. But then imagine that you have what you might describe as a bigger problem, and that's not the problem. It's the fact that you have problems, because that's the real problem. The real problem is the fact that you have problems. And then you might say, well, you don't want a solution to a problem. You want a solution to the fact that you have problems. And so it's a leap of abstraction, right? So then you might say, well, is there a way of conceptualizing the set of all problems that's universal? And I think there is. I mean, that's what religious stories try to do, and they do it using dramatic means, because the problem is so complex, so that's the meta problem. It's so complex that we don't really know how to formulate it. But that's what we're struggling towards. So it's like, well, what's the problem of life? Something like that. Well, you could say that the problem of life, and I outlined this quite carefully in 12 Rules for Life. The problem of life is this: we're finite and mortal. That's problem number one. So the first problem is that life is essentially tragic. It's little us against infinity, and we lose. And not only do we lose, but we lose in a manner that produces a substantial amount of suffering, and sometimes an unbearable amount. So it's a big problem. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that that's not the worst problem. The worst problem is that that's true, plus malevolence exists in the world, evil exists in the world, and makes that first problem even worse than it would have to be. And that's universally true for everyone all the time. That's archetypal. So when you formulate a situation archetypally, you speak about it in a manner that's eternally true. So there's lots of ways that you and I differ, but there's many ways that we're the same. And so that would be what constitutes our essential humanity, let's say. And what makes us the same is that, like you, I'm mortal, and my life is finite, and my existence is characterized by suffering, and I have to contend with the fact of malevolence in the world. And it's the terribly destructive character of the natural world, it's the tyrannical element of the social world, and it's the adversarial element of myself and every other individual. So that's the malevolent element. And so we're stuck with that. Okay, fine. That's the archetypal formulation of the problem. You could say that's the mythic landscape, right? And it's something like good and evil in a world of chaos and order. It's something like that. It's very interesting. You know, there are games online that have that as their basic structure, right? The game developers have figured this out. So that's pretty interesting. Okay, so then the question is, well, how do you comport yourself in a landscape of chaos and order, and when the game is good versus evil, something like that? Well, then that's where the idea of the archetypal hero emerges. And the archetypal hero is the person whose eyes are open and whose speech is true, and who faces both the chaos of the unknown and the tyranny of the known and balances them, right? And then you think, well, and that's the antidote to the problem. That's the meta solution to the meta problem. That which you most need is to be found where you least want to look.
Yeah, it's the King Arthur theme.
That's right. It's the whole theme of the Holy Grail. That's exactly right. Well, so there's a little story that goes along with that. So King Arthur and his knights are all sitting around a round table, which implies that they're of equal stature, essentially. And they go off to look for the Holy Grail, which is the container of that which redeems. It's something like that. But of course, who the hell knows where to look for the Holy Grail? So each of the knights decides to enter the forest at the point that looks darkest to him.